The alarm that echoed through Ironhold Dock that morning was different from the usual ones. Cole had heard every kind of alarm the station had. The short double beep of a docking vessel. The long flat tone of a fuel pressure warning. The rapid pulse of a fire alert in the lower bays. He knew them all the way a person knows the sounds of their own home. This one was none of those. It was low and slow and heavy, a sound the dock used so rarely that half the crew stopped moving just to figure out what it was. Cole set down his wrench. He had been working on a cargo loader since early morning, crouched beneath its drive housing with a diagnostic cable in one hand and cold coffee sitting forgotten on a nearby crate. Bay 7 was quiet at that hour, just him, the hum of the station walls, and the distant sounds of the outer dock. He liked it that way. Cole was not the kind of person who needed noise around him to feel comfortable. He was the kind of person who got the job done and went home and came back the next day and did it again. 11 years at Ironhold Dock. Same bay. Same tools. Same cold coffee. He stood up and walked to the observation window. What he saw made him forget entirely about the cargo loader. It was coming in from the east entry corridor, the wide one used for large vessels, and it filled the passage almost completely. At first, Cole's brain tried to process it as a ship. It was the right size for a ship. It was moving the way a ship moved when it was being pulled in by dock tethers, slow and heavy and without its own power. But it was not a ship. It was covered in scales. Deep blue-black scales, each one the size of a cargo panel, layered across a body that was curved and organic and nothing like any vessel Cole had ever seen. Long structures swept back from its upper body like folded wings, tucked close as though too tired to hold open. Its underside ran with faint lines of bioluminescent light, pale blue and soft gold running in patterns that looked almost like veins, almost like rivers on a map, almost like something alive. Because it was alive. Cole had heard of the Veil Theory the way most dock workers had, as a story mostly. Ancient living ships bonded to the noble houses of the Draconis people. Not machines that looked like dragons. Actual living creatures, biological and mechanical at the same time, that had been flying between stars for longer than most civilizations had existed. Bonded to a single rider for life. Inseparable. Two lives running on one shared thread. He had never seen one in person. Nobody on this station had, in a very long time. The alien technician beside him, a tall, four-armed Crestian woman named Ren who had worked the observation post for 9 years and was not easily impressed by anything, had both sets of her eyes wide open. All four of them. Veil Theory, she said quietly. Just the one word. Like that was enough. It was enough. The creature, Virith, though Cole did not know her name yet, was moved into the main receiving bay by the dock tethers, and the full sight of her under the bay's bright lights was something that made the watching crew go silent without anyone deciding to. She was enormous. 3 times the length of the largest vessel currently docked. Her body moved with the tethers without resistance, and that absence of resistance was the first thing that told Cole something was very wrong. A healthy creature fights a tether. Even a little. Even just the natural tension of a living body that has its own will and its own strength. Virith did not fight anything. She came in the way a person comes through a door when they have no strength left to lift their feet properly. One slow movement after another. Her head, which Cole imagined in health would be carried high, hung low. The bioluminescent lines along her scales were not steady. They flickered. Whole sections of her body were simply dark. Patches across her sides and back where the light had already gone out completely, the scales there dull and flat like stone instead of alive. Cole watched the dark patches and felt something in his chest go tight. The dock medical team moved fast. They had been alerted before the vessel arrived. Some kind of emergency signal sent ahead, Cole guessed, and they were ready at the bay floor when the tethers locked Virith into position. Alien medics in full gear, scanners already running, moving toward the creature's entry point with the focused efficiency of people who knew exactly what they were doing. Cole left the observation window and went down to the bay floor. Nobody told him to. It was not his department. He was a mechanic, not a medic, and this was clearly a medical situation. But his feet took him down the stairs and across the floor anyway, and he stood at the edge of the medical team's perimeter and watched. The entry to the Veil Theory's interior was a living structure. Organic, warm to look at even from a distance, the fibrous material around the opening moving slowly the way something breathes. The medical team went inside and Cole waited. They came back out carrying her. She was tall. Dressed in dark red and silver armor that had clearly been through something difficult recently, scorch marks along one side, a deep dent in the left shoulder plate. Her face was sharp-featured and composed even in unconsciousness, the kind of face that was used to being in control of itself. Around her right wrist, a thin thread of light ran, Organic, living, connected to Virith the way a wire connects 2 points in a circuit. The bond thread. Cole had read about those. The living connection between a Veiltheri and her rider. 2 lives sharing one current. Right now the thread was barely glowing. Pale and thin and unsteady, the same as the light on Viritha's scales. The lead physician, a gray-skinned Marathai named Doss, calm and precise and experienced enough that Cole trusted his reads, ran his scanner across both the rider and the Veiltheri's exterior in quick succession. Then he stood still for a moment looking at his results. Cole knew that stillness. It was the stillness of someone deciding how to say something that was not going to be good. The life bond is failing, Doss said, to no one in particular and everyone present. Both of them are in decline. The Veiltheri's core flame, the central bioenergy source that sustains the creature, is critically unstable. Without restoration, neither the ship nor her rider will survive past 2 rotations. Someone nearby asked the obvious question. Can it be restored? Doss looked at his scanner one more time. Then he closed it. The biomechanical systems of a Veiltheri are ancient technology. The Draconis engineers who maintain these creatures are long gone. We do not have the knowledge, the tools, or the training to attempt core restoration. He looked at the rider being transferred to a medical stretcher. We will keep them comfortable. The group began to disperse. Medics moving the rider toward the station's medical bay. Dock staff returning to their posts. The moment of stillness breaking apart the way it always did when a situation moved from emergency to outcome. 4 alien specialists had arrived while Doss was speaking. The station's senior biotechnical team, pulled in for exactly this kind of situation. They spread out around Viritha's exterior with their advanced scanners, running assessments, speaking to each other in clipped technical language across 3 different alien dialects. Cole stood nearby and watched them work. It took them less than an hour. They compared results, debated briefly, compared again, and reached their conclusion with the quiet efficiency of people who were very good at their jobs and had no reason to doubt their own findings. Unsalvageable. They packed their equipment. Filed their preliminary reports on handheld devices as they walked. Left the bay in the direction of the station's upper levels, already moving on to the next thing. Cole did not move. He stood on the bay floor and looked at Virith. Up close, without the observation window between them, she was even more real than she had seemed from above. He could hear the slow, uneven rhythm of her breathing, a deep, resonant sound like wind moving through a large space but wrong in its timing. Too slow. Too uncertain. The dark patches on her scales were larger than they had looked from the window, and the bioluminescent lines between them were so faint now that he had to look carefully to see them at all. He looked at the bond thread on the unconscious rider's wrist as the stretcher was wheeled past him. 2 lives on one thread. Both of them almost out of light. Cole picked up his cold coffee from where he had left it on a nearby equipment shelf. He took a slow sip. He set it back down. Then he pulled out his basic diagnostic tool, opened a fresh page in his battered notebook, and walked toward Viritha's entry. Nobody called him back. The inside of Virith was warm. That was the first thing Cole noticed when he stepped through the entry. Not warm the way a machine was warm, not the dry heat of engines running or fuel lines under pressure. Warm the way a living thing was warm. Like standing next to someone. Like the heat that came off another body in a cold room. He stood just inside the entry for a moment and let his eyes adjust. The passage ahead of him was curved, the walls made of a dense fibrous material that reminded him of something between muscle and bark. It was dark, but not completely. Bioluminescent veins ran along the ceiling in thin lines, giving off just enough pale blue light to see by. Some of them were steady. Most of them were not. They flickered in slow, irregular pulses, brightening slightly and then fading back over and over like something trying very hard to keep going. Cole took out his small work light, clipped it to his jacket collar and started walking. He moved slowly. He was not in a hurry. Rushing through an unfamiliar system, mechanical or biological, was how you missed things, and missing things in a system this critical was not an option. He kept one hand trailing lightly along the wall as he walked, feeling the texture, feeling the temperature, feeling the pulse that ran beneath the surface like a slow, tired heartbeat. He counted his steps. He noted the junctions. He made small marks in his notebook, not technical diagrams, just simple observations. The way a certain section of wall felt harder than the sections before it. The way the bioluminescent veins in the ceiling clustered more thickly near some passages and thinned out near others. The way the air changed slightly, drier, cooler, the further he moved from the entry. 11 years of fixing things had taught Cole one rule above all others. Before you touch anything, understand it. He had seen engineers, good ones, experienced ones, walk into a broken system and immediately start pulling components, adjusting settings, forcing changes? Sometimes it worked. More often it made things worse because they were solving the problem they assumed they had instead of the problem they actually had. Cole never assumed. He spent the first hour just walking, just observing, just listening. The sound inside Virith was something he had not expected. Under the soft flicker of the bioluminescent light and the slow rhythm of her breathing, there was another sound, very faint, almost below the level of hearing. A kind of low, uneven hum. Not mechanical. Not quite biological either. Something in between. It came from deeper inside, from the direction Cole estimated the center of the creature's body would be, and it was irregular in a way that bothered him. Not because it was loud. Because of what the irregularity meant. A system running unevenly was a system compensating. Something somewhere was not doing its job, and other things were working harder to cover for it. That never lasted. The harder the compensating systems worked, the faster they failed too. It was a cascade. One failure leading to the next until everything stopped. Virith was in a cascade right now. Cole noted that in his book and kept walking. By the second hour he had found the first one. He had moved into a side passage. Narrower, the walls closer together, the bioluminescent veins here almost completely dark. He was running his basic diagnostic tool along the wall, watching the readings, when the tool registered something unexpected. Not damage. Not rupture. Not any kind of physical destruction to the biomechanical structure around him. A disconnection. The pathway was intact. The walls were intact. The organic conduits running through the fibrous material were structurally fine. No tears, no burns, no breakage of any kind. But the flow through them had simply stopped. The bioenergy that should have been moving through this section was not moving. It was as if someone had lifted a wire out of a circuit without breaking the wire. The wire was still there. Still perfectly good. It just was not connected to anything anymore. Cole stood very still and looked at his readings for a long time. Then he moved to the next passage. Same thing. He moved to the next one after that. Same thing. He spent the next 3 hours working his way methodically through the sections of Viritha's interior he could access, mapping each disconnection point in his notebook. Not damage. Not destruction. Disconnection, over and over, bioenergy pathways that were physically intact but had lost their flow, the living current that should have been running through them simply absent. The alien specialists had scanned Virith from the outside. Their equipment was far more advanced than anything Cole was carrying. They had access to full biomechanical imaging systems, deep structure scanners, technology that could map an organic system down to its smallest components from 20 meters away. And they had called her unsalvageable. Cole thought about that as he worked. The thing about very advanced scanning equipment was that it told you what was there. It showed you structure, composition, physical state. What it did not always tell you, what it sometimes missed completely, was what was absent. A scanner looking for damage would find damage. It would measure and record and report every point of physical harm in precise detail. But if there was no physical damage to find, the scanner had nothing to report. And nothing to report looked exactly the same as nothing to be done. Cole wrote in his notebook, not broken. Disconnected. Find the source. He moved deeper. The station's night cycle had shifted the outer dock lights to their dim blue setting by the time Cole reached what he believed was the main trunk of Viritha's bioenergy network. The central pathway that all the smaller passages branched off from, the equivalent of a main power line in a standard electrical system. Here the disconnections were not scattered and individual. Here they were clustered, layered, multiple failures running in sequence like a chain where every link had come loose at the same time. He was crouching over the third cluster, notebook open, tracing the pattern of disconnections with his diagnostic tool, when he heard footsteps behind him. He did not startle. He had developed, over many years of working in quiet spaces, the habit of staying calm when something unexpected happened. Startling made you drop things. Dropping things in tight spaces meant losing them. He looked over his shoulder. She was standing 10 feet behind him in the passage. She had clearly come from the medical bay against every instruction she had been given. She was dressed in a plain station-issue garment instead of her armor, and she was moving carefully, one hand on the wall, but she was moving. Her face was pale and tight with the effort it was costing her, but her eyes were fully alert. Sharp and direct, the way they had been even when she was barely conscious on the dock floor. Cole turned back to his work. "You are still here," she said. Her voice was quiet in the passage. "Steady." "Still working," Cole said. He heard her take a few slow steps forward, stopping when she was close enough to see what he was doing without being close enough to interfere with it. The specialists left hours ago, she said. I know. Pause. She was watching him work. He could feel it, the particular quality of attention from someone who was trying to understand what they were seeing. What have you found? She asked. Cole finished marking the cluster in his notebook before he answered. She is not destroyed, he said. Her systems are intact. Physically, structurally, the pathways are fine. The conduits are fine. There is no damage that I can find in any section I have walked. He sat back on his heels. The bioenergy has stopped flowing. Not because anything broke. Because something interrupted the flow and the system has not been able to restart it. The passage was quiet for a moment. The alien engineers found no damage either, she said slowly. They concluded the core flame was simply failing from age and stress. A natural end. They were looking for damage, Cole said. They found none and stopped looking. He tapped his notebook. I kept looking. Another pause. Longer this time. If you are correct, she said carefully, then the disconnections would need to be manually traced and restored, pathway by pathway back to the core. She stopped. Something in her voice changed, not louder but heavier. And the final connections will be at the core itself. That is what I expect, Cole said. Then you need to hear something, she said. I need you to actually hear it, not just listen and continue. Cole looked up at her. Her eyes were steady and serious and carrying something in them that was not quite fear but was related to it. Something that came from knowing a fact so completely that it had stopped being frightening and become simply real. No one survives contact with a Veil Theory core flame, she said. Not bonded engineers, not Draconis specialists, not anyone who has ever attempted it. The bioenergy output at the core is not survivable for a non-bonded individual. This is not a warning based on caution. She held his gaze. It is documented history. Everyone who has tried has died. Cole looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once. Then he turned back to his notebook and kept working. She stood in the passage behind him for a long time without speaking. He did not know when she left. He was too focused on the pattern of disconnection spreading across the pages of his notebook, and the quiet, struggling pulse of Virith beneath his hands, and the shape of a problem that everyone else had already given up on. He had not given up on it. He was only getting started. Cole returned to Virith before the station lights had shifted back to their daytime cycle. He had slept for 3 hours on a cot in the mechanic's restroom, eaten something he could not remember the taste of, and was back at the entry with fresh pages open in his notebook before most of the dock crew had started their morning shifts. The cold coffee was a new cup this time. He forgot to drink it just as quickly as he always did. He stepped inside. The warmth of Virith's interior met him the same way it had the night before. That living warmth, that presence that no machine had ever given off in all his years of work. He noticed, before he had taken 10 steps, that something was slightly different from the previous night. The bioluminescent veins in the ceiling above the entry passage were a little brighter. Not much. Just enough to see the difference if you had spent enough hours in here to know what they had looked like before. Cole stopped and looked at them. Then he looked at the wall beside him and pressed his palm flat against it. The pulse was there. Still slow, still uneven, still the tired, struggling rhythm of a system running on very little. But it was slightly stronger than it had been last night. Not better, not well, but not worse either. He wrote that in his notebook. Then he moved deeper and went back to work. The mapping was mostly done. He had spent the previous night tracing the disconnection chains from the outer passages inward, and he had a clear enough picture now to begin the actual reconnection process, starting from the outermost points and working toward the center, restoring the flow pathway by pathway the way you would restore a power grid from the edges in, making sure each section was live before moving to the next. It was slow work. He could not simply plug things back together. The biomechanical pathways of a Veil Theory were not wires or connectors or anything that responded to standard tools and standard ways. Cole had to work by feel and observation, applying careful manual pressure to collapsed organic conduits, holding them in alignment while he watched his diagnostic tool for any sign of returning flow, then moving to the next point when the reading shifted. Most of the time nothing happened immediately. He would work a disconnection point for 20 minutes, 30 minutes and see nothing change. Then, slowly, the reading would shift, a tiny increase in the bioenergy signature, a faint brightening of the veins nearby, a barely perceptible change in the pulse beneath his hands. It was working. Slowly. Quietly. Without any dramatic sign that would have satisfied someone looking for quick results. But it was working. He was an hour into the second day's work, deep in the left side passage network, crouched over a particularly stubborn disconnection cluster, when it happened. He was not thinking about anything except the work directly in front of him. His left hand was pressed against the wall, feeling for the pulse. His right hand was holding the diagnostic tool steady against the conduit junction he was trying to realign. His eyes were on the reading. And then, without any warning at all, he saw something that was not in front of him. It was not a vision exactly. It was not like closing his eyes and seeing something. It was more like a piece of knowledge arriving. The way you sometimes know where a tool is without looking because your hands remember putting it down. Except this knowledge was not his own memory. It was an image of a passage. Specific, detailed, clear. 3 branches to his left, then forward, then a slight turn to the right. A section of wall he had not yet reached in his mapping. And in that section, a disconnection point. Larger than anything he had found so far. A critical junction where multiple pathways met, all of them interrupted at once. Cole went completely still. He stayed still for a long moment, not moving, just holding the image in his mind and turning it over carefully the way he turned over an unfamiliar component, examining it, making sure he understood what he was looking at. Then he stood up slowly and pressed both hands flat against the wall. The pulse came back to him steady and deliberate, different from the weak struggling rhythm he had been feeling all night. This one had a quality of intention to it. Like the difference between a person breathing because they were alive and a person breathing because they were trying to get your attention. Cole understood immediately what had happened. He looked at the wall for a moment. "All right," he said quietly. His voice was calm and even in the empty passage the way it always was when he was working. "I hear you." He picked up his notebook and walked 3 branches to the left. The passage was exactly as the image had shown him. The disconnection junction was exactly where he had been shown it was. A wide section of wall where 6 separate bioenergy pathways converged, all 6 of them interrupted. The organic conduits collapsed inward at the meeting point like a knot that had been pulled too tight and locked up. Without the image he would have found it eventually. Probably. It might have taken another full day of mapping to reach it. And by then, the cascade in Viritha's system might have progressed far enough that the outer reconnections he had already done would have started failing again. Instead he was here now, with time still available, with the system stable enough to hold what he had already fixed. Cole crouched down and began to work. He did not say anything else to Virith. He did not need to. The understanding between them had shifted into something that did not require words, or even images most of the time. As he worked through the morning, the guidance came in smaller forms. A change in the pulse that told him he was moving in the right direction. A slight easing of resistance in the wall material that meant a conduit was ready to be realigned. A barely perceptible warmth that gathered under his hands at exactly the point where the next disconnection was waiting. He followed every signal. Every one of them was right. By midday, 3 of the 6 pathways at the critical junction were restored. The bioluminescent veins in the ceiling above him had gone from barely visible to a steady, soft blue glow that lit the passage clearly without his work light. The pulse under his hands had picked up a new consistency, still not strong, still not healthy, but regular in a way it had not been before. What Cole did not know, and would only find out later, was that the dock observation window above Bay 12 had been occupied since mid-morning. Word had spread the way it always spread on a station where hundreds of people lived and worked in close quarters. Quietly, person to person, carried in low voices during shift changes and meal breaks. A human mechanic was still inside the Veil Ferry. He had been inside since yesterday. He was still working. The alien specialist had left. He had not. By the time the dock lights were showing noon, there were 11 crew members at the observation window. By mid-afternoon there were more than 30. They watched Cole move in and out of Viritha's entry, emerging to check his notebook, make a note, drink half his cold coffee, then go back inside. They watched the bioluminescent patterns on Viritha's scales, which had been dark and flat since her arrival, begin returning in slow patches. Small areas at first, a section along her left side, a strip across her upper back, glowing faintly but genuinely, no longer guttering. Nobody on the dock floor was talking very much. A Helvan cargo worker named Bryn, who had been on the dock for 20 years and was not known for sentiment, stood at the window with his arms crossed and watched Viritha's scales slowly come back to life and did not say a single word for 40 minutes. Not everyone watching felt the same way. Overseer Dren arrived at the station master's office at the 14th hour of the day cycle, and he did not knock. Gore looked up from his desk with the patient expression of someone who had been expecting this visit. Dren was a tall, angular Veloci with a long career and strong opinions about the proper order of things. He had been one of the 4 senior specialists who had assessed Virith on her arrival. He had signed his name to the unsalvageable report. He had packed his equipment and filed his findings and moved on, the way a professional did when a situation was beyond recovery. Watching a human dock mechanic spend 2 days proving that report wrong was not sitting comfortably with him. But that was not what he brought to Gore's office. What he brought was a risk assessment. He laid it out clearly and with genuine technical precision, because whatever else Dren was, he was not incompetent and the risk he was describing was real. A Veil-Theory core flame in its failing state was already producing unstable bioenergy output. A failed restoration attempt, particularly one that reached the core itself and disrupted it incorrectly, could trigger a catastrophic release. Not a contained system failure. A bioenergy explosion capable of destroying the entire receiving bay and everything connected to it. People. Equipment. A significant portion of Ironhold Dock itself. Gore listened to all of it without interrupting. When Dren finished, Gore was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would speak with Cole. The conversation happened at the entry to Bay 12, with Viritha's dark patch scales visible behind them and the watching crew doing a poor job of pretending not to listen. Gore laid it out the same way he did everything, plainly, directly, without softening it more than was honest. The risk was real. The potential consequences were serious. If something went wrong at the core stage, the responsibility would fall entirely on Cole. The station could not officially sanction what he was doing. Whatever happened next was his choice and his alone. Cole listened to every word. He stood quietly with his notebook in one hand and his diagnostic tool in the other, and he heard Gore out completely without interrupting, the way he always listened, fully, carefully, without already forming his answer before the other person had finished speaking. When Gore was done, Cole nodded once. Then he turned around, walked back to Viritha's entry and stepped inside. Behind him, 30-something crew members at the observation window watched him go. Bryn the cargo worker uncrossed his arms. Nobody said anything. Cole reached the core chamber on the third day. He had known he was getting close for about an hour before he arrived. The signs were clear enough if you knew how to read them. The bioluminescent veins in the ceiling had been growing denser the deeper he moved, more of them running closer together, converging toward the center of Viritha's body the way tributaries converge toward a river. The warmth in the walls had increased steadily, not uncomfortable but noticeable, the kind of warmth that told you something significant was nearby. And the pulse beneath his hands had changed in character. Less like a heartbeat now and more like something directional, like a current pulling toward a single point. He followed it. The passage opened without warning. One moment he was in the narrow corridor, walls close on both sides, ceiling low. Then the walls simply fell away and he was standing at the edge of a large open space that his work light could not fully reach across. Cole stood at the entrance for a moment and looked. The chamber was enormous. Much larger than anything he had expected to find inside the creature. A vaulted organic space with a ceiling that curved high above him, every surface covered in the dense fibrous material of Viritha's interior but layered here in complex structures, intricate and built up over what must have been centuries of growth. Thick cables of organic conduit ran from every direction across the walls and ceiling, all of them converging toward the center of the room in a pattern that reminded Cole, dimly, of a web. Or a system of roots. Everything in the chamber reaching toward one point. The core. It sat at the center of the space on a raised section of floor, roughly the size and shape of a fuel drum but organic, asymmetrical, slightly uneven, the outer layer translucent in the way that deep water was translucent. Through it Cole could see the flame. He had been prepared for it to be small. The readings had told him that. The pale, guttering light on Viritha's scales had told him that. Everything he had observed over 3 days had told him that the core flame was failing and nearly gone. Knowing it and seeing it were different things. Was barely there. A soft, unsteady point of gold light at the center of the core, smaller than his fist, pulsing in a rhythm so slow and irregular that each pause between pulses lasted long enough for Cole's chest to tighten waiting for the next one. It was the kind of light that a candle gave in the last few seconds before the wax ran out. Present. Fragile. Temporary in a way that was painful to look at directly. Cole walked slowly to the center of the chamber and crouched in front of the core. He did not touch it yet. He studied it first, the way he always studied something before he touched it. He let his eyes trace the outer surface, looking for the final disconnection points. He had known since the second day that the last 3 breaks in Viritha's bioenergy chain would be here at the core itself. Everything he had been fixing over the past 3 days had been working inward toward this moment, restoring the outer pathway section by section, clearing the way so that when the core was finally reconnected the energy would have somewhere to go. He found all 3 points within a few minutes of looking. They were close to the core surface. Reachable. Each one a place where the organic conduit met the core housing and the connection had been broken, Not destroyed, just interrupted, the same as every other disconnection he had found throughout Viratha's body. Intact. Simply not connected. To reach them he would have to place his hands directly on the core housing. Cole stayed crouched in front of the core for a while and thought about that. He thought about what Sarah had told him in the passage 2 nights ago. Documented history. Everyone who had ever attempted direct core contact had died. Not most of them. Not many of them. Every single one. The bioenergy output at the core was not survivable for a non-bonded individual. He thought about the historical records he had read, the brief accounts of previous attempts, the clinical descriptions of what the bioenergy discharge did to a person who was exposed to it directly. It was not a gentle thing. It was described as total and immediate, a force that overwhelmed every system in the body at once. He thought about why. That was the part he kept coming back to. Not the fact of the deaths, the reason for them. The accounts all described the same response from the engineers who had tried. They had braced against the energy, shielded themselves, tried to contain the output, to protect themselves from it while they worked, to manage the force rather than be consumed by it. It was the logical response. It was what any sensible person would do when facing something that could kill them. You protected yourself. You resisted. But Cole had spent 3 days working with Virath. 3 days of following her guidance, of letting her show him where to go instead of deciding on his own, of pressing his hands against her walls and feeling her pulse and working with the rhythm of her systems instead of against them. He had learned in those 3 days that Virath was not something you managed. She was something you worked with. He pressed his palm flat against the core housing. The energy hit him instantly. It was not like anything he had felt before. Not heat exactly, or not only heat. It was heat and pressure and something alive and moving and vast, flooding into him from the point of contact and spreading outward through his hands and up his arms and into his chest with a speed that left no time to think. His vision went white. The chamber disappeared. There was only the energy, enormous and immediate and completely beyond any scale he had ever worked with. Every part of him that was made of instinct and training and 11 years of mechanical habit screamed the same thing in the same instant. Let go. Cole did not let go. He breathed. One breath. Slow and deliberate, the way he breathed when a repair was at its most delicate and his hands needed to be absolutely steady. The way he breathed when he was taking his time and doing the job right. He stopped pushing against the energy. He stopped bracing. Stopped shielding. Stopped trying to control what was moving through him. Instead he felt for its direction. The energy had a current, he could feel that now in the white blaze of it. It was not chaotic. It was not random. It was moving the way current moved through a circuit, the way water moved through a pipe, following the path of least resistance toward the place it was trying to go. It had direction and intention and it was not trying to destroy him. It was trying to move. And it had nowhere to go because the connections were broken. Cole let his hands move. He stopped thinking in words and let his hands do what 11 years of work had trained them to do. Find the path, follow the system, restore the flow. His fingers found the first disconnection point on the core surface through the white and the heat and the pressure and he aligned it the way he had aligned every other point over the past 3 days by feel, by the change in resistance, by the almost imperceptible shift in the energy current when the connection seated correctly. The first one locked. The energy moved differently. Still enormous. Still blazing through him. But the current shifted, smoother, more directed, flowing into the restored pathway the way water flowed into an open channel. His hands found the second point. Above him, the station alarms began to scream. He heard them distantly, the way you heard sounds from outside when you were deep inside a building and fully focused on something. Real but far away. Not relevant to the work directly in front of him. He heard Dren's voice somewhere beyond the chamber, loud, sharp, carrying the tone of authority that expected to be obeyed. Ordering evacuation. Ordering everyone back. Describing what was going to happen in the kind of precise, technical language that was meant to make people move quickly. Cole's hands found the second point and aligned it. The second connection locked. The energy current changed again. Larger now, the flow more powerful as more of Viratha's restored pathways opened up and the bioenergy found its route back through her system. The warmth in the chamber had increased to something Cole could feel on his face, on his arms, pressing against him from every direction. He heard one more voice cut through the alarm noise. Sarah. Not panicked. Not shouting. Just firm and completely unmovable, telling whoever was trying to move her that she was not leaving and that they should stop wasting time trying. The voice of someone who had made a decision and was done discussing it. Cole found the third point. This one was harder. The position was awkward, requiring him to shift his grip on the core housing in a way that changed how the energy was moving through his hands, the current suddenly less smooth, more turbulent, pressing against him with a force that made his arms shake. His vision was still white. His hands were burning. He could feel the burns happening in real time and registered them the way he registered a pulled muscle during heavy work. Present, noted, not stopping anything. He breathed again. Found the current again. Followed it. The third connection locked. The change was immediate and total. The turbulent pressure smoothed in an instant. All of it, everywhere at once, the energy shifting from a force that was pressing against everything trying to find a way out into a current that was simply moving. Clean and directed and flowing through Viratha's fully restored pathways the way it was supposed to flow. The white in Cole's vision shifted. Warmer. Deeper. Gold. The alarms stopped. The silence that followed was the sudden, complete kind. The kind that happened when something very loud ended all at once and the absence of noise was almost physical. Cole became aware in that silence that he was on one knee on the chamber floor. Both hands still on the core housing. His arms were shaking. The burns along his forearms were serious and would need real attention. He looked at the core. The flame was no longer small. It filled the entire core housing with deep, steady, warm gold light, burning with a solidity and strength that made the previous guttering point seem impossible to compare to it. The light reached across the entire chamber, lit every surface, ran out through the organic conduits in the walls and spread into the passages beyond. Cole could feel the pulse change beneath his hands. Not struggling. Not irregular. Strong. Even. Certain. He let go of the core. He sat back on the floor of the chamber for a moment, breathing, letting his hands rest against his knees. The gold light was all around him, warm and steady, and through the walls of the chamber he could feel Viratha's pulse running outward through her entire body, restored and full and alive. Cole exhaled slowly. Then he stood up. Then he walked out. Cole was sitting on the edge of a medical bay table when the dock went quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of a slow shift or an empty corridor. This was the kind of quiet that happened when a large number of people all stopped what they were doing at the same moment because something had caught every eye at once. Cole had heard that particular quality of silence twice before in his 11 years at Ironhold Dock. Once during a catastrophic pressure failure in the outer hull, and once when a Draconis warship had passed through the nebula close enough to see with the naked eye. He looked toward the medical bay window. The medical team around him looked too. Virath was moving. Not the slow, heavy, surrendered movement of her arrival 3 days ago. Not the barely there rise and fall of a creature using the last of its strength just to breathe. She was moving with presence, with the deliberate, full-bodied motion of something that had weight and will and the energy to use both. Her head rose first, lifting from the dock floor in a single slow arc higher and higher until it was fully raised and her neck was extended and she was looking out across the bay with the bearing of a creature that had not forgotten what it was. Her scales were no longer dark. The bioluminescent patterns that had been guttering and fading since the moment she arrived were returning, not in small patches the way they had been slowly recovering over the past 2 days, but all at once, spreading outward from her core in a wave that moved across her entire body like sunrise moving across open water. Deep blue-black scales lit from beneath with gold and blue light, the patterns running in clean lines from her chest outward along her sides, up her neck, down the length of her body to the tip of her tail. She was blazing. That was the only word for it. The light coming off her scales was not faint or subtle or barely visible. It was rich and full and warm, filling the bay with a soft gold-blue glow that reached the observation windows and the upper walkways and made every surface in the dock look like it had been touched by something extraordinary. The 30-odd crew members at the observation window were completely still. Bryn, the cargo worker, who had stood at that window for the better part of 3 days and said almost nothing the entire time, put one large hand flat against the glass without seeming to realize he had done it. Virath turned her head. She moved it slowly, with complete deliberateness, not the random shifting of an animal looking for something, but the directed, intentional movement of someone who knew exactly where they were looking and was choosing to look there. She turned her great head toward the medical bay. Toward the window where Cole sat on the table with both arms freshly bandaged and a medical technician still trying to get him to hold still long enough to finish the treatment. She looked directly at him. The distance between them was significant. The width of the dock floor, the wall, the glass of the medical bay window between them. None of it seemed to matter. The look was direct and clear and carried the same quality of intention that her pulse had carried through 3 days of shared work in her passages. Cole felt it arrive in his chest like a steady hand placed over his heart. Warm. Certain. Grateful in a way that had no need for words because it was too large and too genuine for words to carry properly. He held her gaze through the window for a moment. Then he nodded once, The same small, simple nod he had given 100 times during the repair work when she had shown him something and he had understood it. The acknowledgement between two people, or whatever they were to each other now, who had figured out how to communicate without language and did not need to change that now. Virith held his gaze for another long moment. Then she lowered her head slightly, not weakness, not exhaustion. Something deliberate. Something that, if a human had done it, Cole would have called a bow. The dock crew watched this happen in complete silence. Then someone started clapping. It was not organized. It was not started by anyone trying to lead it. It simply began. One person, then three, then everyone at the observation window, then the crew on the dock floor below, then the people on the upper walkways who had been watching from above. Alien species whose hands were not shaped for clapping found other ways, feet on metal grating, the particular vocal tone that Christians used for approval, the rhythmic double knock of Helvan knuckles against any hard surface. Cole looked away from the window and let the medical technician finish the bandaging. He did not say anything. He was very tired and his arms hurt considerably, and the gold light from Viritha's scales was warming the entire bay in a way that made it difficult to feel anything except quietly, deeply relieved. He had been sitting there for about 20 minutes, mostly still, letting his body remember what it felt like to not be flooded with bioenergy when the door opened. Sarah walked in. She was not moving the way she had been moving 2 days ago when she had come to him in Viritha's passage, carefully, painfully, one hand on the wall. She was walking fully upright, steady and unhurried, with the natural authority of someone who moved through spaces as though they belonged to her. The bond thread at her wrist was glowing the same deep gold as Viritha's core flame, steady and strong, pulsing in a rhythm that matched the pulse Cole could feel faintly even through the wall of the medical bay. Her face was composed. It was always composed. But something behind her eyes was different from every previous time he had seen her. The tight, controlled quality that had been there since the moment he first saw her unconscious on the dock floor, the particular tension of someone carrying a weight they could not put down, was simply gone. She looked like a person who had been holding their breath for a very long time and had finally been allowed to stop. She crossed the room and sat in the chair across from his table. For a moment she just looked at him, at his bandaged arms, at his expression, at the general state of someone who had done something very difficult and come out the other side of it. Then she said, "How are your arms?" "They'll be fine," Cole said. She nodded slowly. She seemed to be choosing her next words carefully, which was not something he had previously observed her needing to do. "I want to tell you something," she said. "I need you to understand that I am not speaking loosely or using an expression. I am telling you a precise historical fact." Cole looked at her and waited. "In 400 years of recorded Draconis history," Sarah said, "no veil theory has ever voluntarily communicated with a non-bonded individual. Not guided one. Not sent images or feelings or directional pulses to anyone outside the bond." She paused. "The few non-bonded people who have reported sensing anything from a veil theory were later found to have trace biological compatibility with the species, a rare genetic factor. Even those individuals were never actively guided. The veil theory simply did not reject them." She met Cole's eyes steadily. "Virith did not merely fail to reject you. She reached out to you. She guided your hands. She showed you exactly where to go and what to do for 3 consecutive days." Cole was quiet for a moment. "I know what she did," he said. "I was there." "Yes," Sarah said. "What I am telling you is what it means." She leaned forward slightly. "Our engineers have spent generations trying to understand veil theory communication. We have theories, studies, centuries of careful observation. We know that a veil theory chooses who to bond with based on factors we cannot fully measure or predict. We know that the bond, once formed, is absolute and lifelong." She paused again. "We have never had a category for what Virith did with you. There is no historical precedent for it. No record. No name for it in any Draconis documentation." The medical bay was very quiet. The technician who had been finishing Cole's bandaging had gone completely still with his hand still on Cole's wrist, listening without any pretense of not listening. "She trusted you," Sarah said simply. "Not because of your species or your rank or your knowledge of veil theory systems. You had none. She trusted you because of how you came to her. You came without assumptions. You listened before you touched anything. You followed her guidance every single time she gave it without questioning it or overriding it with your own judgment." She sat back slightly. "A veil theory knows the difference between someone who is working on them and someone who is working with them. Virith has known that difference for over 2 centuries. She looked at him steadily. "You were the first non-bonded individual she has ever found worthy of the second." Cole looked at his bandaged hands resting in his lap. He did not say anything for a moment. Then Sarah said, "Give me your left hand." He held it out. Sarah took it carefully, not the grip of a medical examination but the careful hold of someone looking at something important. She turned his hand so the back of it caught the light from Viratha's glow coming through the window. Cole looked at what she was looking at. Along the second and third fingers of his left hand, running from the base knuckle to the tip in a pattern as fine and precise as anything etched by a careful tool, were lines. Gold blue. Faint but completely clear, the same color as Viratha's bioluminescent patterns, the same quality of light. He had not noticed them during the bandaging, they were subtle enough that in ordinary light they were easy to miss. In the gold glow coming through the window they were unmistakable. "What is that?" Cole said. His voice was even. He was asking a genuine question. "A soul mark," Sarah said quietly. She was still holding his hand, still looking at the lines. "A Veiltheri gives it only when they choose, voluntarily, consciously, with full intention, to name someone a trusted presence. Not a bonded rider. Something different. Something the bond does not cover." She turned his hand slightly in the light. "It means she claims you as hers in the way she is able to claim you. Across species. Across every boundary that should have made this impossible." She looked up from his hand to his face. The last recorded soul mark given to a non-draconis individual was 431 years ago. The medical technician set down his equipment very slowly and did not pick it back up. From somewhere down the corridor, the sound of Dren's voice could be heard, formal and sharp, filing a complaint with whoever was unfortunate enough to be in his path at that moment. Neither Cole nor Sarah looked toward the door. They both heard Gore's reply when it came. 3 words. Short. Final. Entirely unmistakable in tone. The complaint was dismissed. Cole looked at the gold-blue lines on his fingers for a long moment. Then he looked through the window at Virath, at her blazing scales and her raised head and the deep steady glow of her restored core flame moving beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. The pulse arrived in his chest again. Warm and steady and certain. He pressed his marked fingers lightly against the glass. Through the wall and the window and all the distance between them, Viratha's scales pulsed once, deep and golden and full. Like an answer. The offer came on the 4th day. Cole was back in Bay 7. Not because there was anything urgent waiting for him there. The cargo loader he had been working on before all of this started had been quietly finished by another mechanic during the 3 days Cole had spent inside Virath. Bay 7 was simply where Cole went when he needed to think. 11 years of habit had made it the most familiar place on the station, the place where his hands knew where everything was without looking and the sounds were predictable and the smell of fuel and metal was something his brain associated with clarity. He was sitting on his work stool with his bandaged arms resting on his knees and his cold coffee beside him when Sarah found him. She came alone. No dock staff with her, no formal escort, no indication that what she was about to say was anything other than a conversation between two people who had been through something significant together. She looked around Bay 7 once, taking in the organized rows of tools, the stacked equipment cases, the general appearance of a workspace that belonged completely to the person who used it, and then she sat on the same crate she had sat on the day she first came to find him here. She did not open with small talk. Cole had noticed over the past 4 days that Sarah did not do small talk. She said what she meant and she said it directly and she waited to see what you did with it. "I want to offer you a position," she said. Cole looked at her. "It does not currently exist," she continued. "There is no formal title for it in any Draconis record because it has never been needed before. A Veiltheri's bonded rider manages everything related to the ship's care through the bond itself, through the direct connection that allows the rider to sense the creature's needs and respond to them." She paused. "The bond does not give me what you have. I can feel Viratha's emotions. I can sense her general state. I cannot do what you did inside her for 3 days." She looked at him steadily. "I cannot hear her the way you hear her." Cole was quiet. "What I am proposing," Sarah said, "is the role of bonded engineer to House Valdrin. Responsible for Viratha's mechanical care, the kind of deep structural understanding that the bond does not provide. The kind that requires someone who can go inside her and work with her systems directly." She let that sit for a moment. "The kind that requires someone she trusts enough to guide." Cole looked at his left hand. The bandaging covered most of it, but he knew the gold-blue lines were there beneath the wrapping. He had looked at them again that morning in the quiet of the rest room, tracing them lightly with one finger, thinking about what Sarah had told him the night before. 431 years since the last one. "I am a dock mechanic," Cole said. "Yes," Sarah said. "I have no title. No Draconis background. No formal training in biomechanical systems or veil theory biology or anything related to your people's technology. No, Sarah agreed. Then why? Because Virith chose you, Sarah said. Simply. Finally. The way she said things when the answer was so complete that adding more to it would only make it smaller. That is the only qualification that matters to us. It is the only qualification that has ever mattered to us. She held his gaze. A veil theory does not make mistakes about people. In 200 years, Virith has never been wrong about anyone she has trusted or refused. She chose you with full knowledge of what you are and what you are not. Sarah paused. So did I. Bay 7 was quiet around them. Cole picked up his cold coffee. He took a sip. He set it back down. He thought about 11 years in this bay. The cargo loaders and the fuel cells and the pressure seals and the familiar weight of tools that fit his hands perfectly from long use. He thought about Gore's patient expression and Ren's forearmed efficiency and the rhythm of a station that he knew so well he could navigate it in the dark. He thought about white light and burning hands and a gold flame coming back to life under his fingers. He thought about the pulse arriving in his chest like a steady hand over his heart. He thought about Sarah saying, "Everywhere. When do we leave?" Cole said. Something moved in Sarah's expression. Not a large movement. She was not a person given to large expressions. But it was real and warm, and Cole filed it away as the closest thing to a smile he had yet seen from her. "Tomorrow morning," she said. With the first tide current through the nebula. She stood, nodded once in the way she nodded when something was settled, and left Bay 7. Cole sat on his stool for another few minutes. Then he started packing. He did not own very much. 11 years at Ironhold Dock, and the total inventory of Cole's personal belongings fit into one medium equipment case and a worn canvas bag. Tools? His own, not the station's, the ones his hands knew individually by weight and feel. His notebooks, all 7 of them, filled with 11 years of observations and diagrams and the particular shorthand he had developed for recording how broken things communicated their problems. A few changes of clothing. A photograph of somewhere green that he had carried for so long he could not clearly remember where it was from. He packed all of it that evening in the mechanic's restroom and set it by the door and slept better than he had in 4 days. The farewell the next morning was not organized. Nobody had announced it. There was no scheduled gathering, no formal send-off, no station-wide notification that Cole was leaving. And yet when he walked through the dock toward Bay 12 with his case and his bag, the people were simply there. Not all of them. The station had hundreds of crew and most of them had their own work in their own mornings. But enough of them. The ones who had stood at the observation window. The ones who had watched the bioluminescent patches return to Virith's scales day by day. The ones who had been present when the alarm stopped and the gold light spread through the bay. They lined the route without making a line of it, standing near their posts, pausing in their work, present in the way that people were present when something was ending that they wanted to acknowledge without making it heavy. Cole walked through them and nodded as he went and did not say much because he was not a person who said much and they knew that and it was fine. Bryn the cargo worker was standing near the Bay 10 junction. He had his arms crossed in his usual posture. He said nothing when Cole passed. He simply uncrossed his arms and extended one large hand. Cole shook it. Bryn nodded once and crossed his arms again and that was the whole of it and it was enough. Ren was waiting near the entry to Bay 12. She was standing straight and still in the Crestian posture that Cole had learned over 9 years of working near her meant something was important to her. She watched him approach with all 4 eyes and when he stopped in front of her she did not speak immediately. Then she raised all 4 of her hands. She placed them on his shoulders, 2 on each side, and held them there with a firm, deliberate pressure that was nothing like a casual gesture. Cole knew enough about Crestian expression to know what it meant. He had seen it done once before years ago, when a Crestian crew member had said goodbye to a mentor who was retiring from the dock. It was the highest form of respect their culture had for a farewell. Cole put one hand briefly over 2 of hers. Ren lowered her hands. She looked at him for a moment with her secondary eyes slightly wider than usual, the Crestian equivalent of an expression too large to hide completely. Then she turned back to her post and did not watch him go, because Crestians considered watching a departure to be an invitation for the person to stay, and she understood that he needed to leave. Gore was at the Bay 12 entrance. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, real coffee, the hot kind from the station master's personal supply that was considerably better than anything available in the mechanic's bay. He handed one to Cole without ceremony. Cole accepted it. They stood together for a moment and drank their coffee and looked at Virith through the bay entrance. She was fully illuminated in the morning dock light, scales blazing blue, black and gold, head raised, the bioluminescent patterns running clean and strong across every surface of her body. She looked like something from a story about the time when the galaxy was younger and the creatures in it were larger and more extraordinary than anything that existed now. She looked like exactly what she was. "You will be missed here," Gore said. He said it the way he said everything, plainly, without decoration, meaning it completely. "I'll miss it here," Cole said. He said it the same way. Gore extended his hand. Cole shook it, a firm, full handshake, the human kind, which Gore had clearly practiced or looked up because he did it correctly. Then Cole picked up his case and his bag and walked into Bay 12. Sarah was standing at Viratha's entry when he arrived. She looked at his case and his bag and said nothing about how little there was of it. She simply stepped aside to let him approach the entry first. Cole stopped at Viratha's side before going in. He set down his bags and pressed his left hand flat against her scales. The warmth was immediate. The pulse came up through her scales and into his palm and traveled up his arm and settled in his chest with the steady certainty he had come to know over the past 3 days as Viratha's particular way of saying that she knew he was there and she was glad of it. He stood like that for a moment with his hand on her scales and the gold light warming the side of his face. Sarah watched him from a few steps back. Then she said quietly, "You fixed what every specialist said could not be fixed." Cole stayed still for another moment. He looked at his left hand against Viratha's scales, at the place where he knew the gold-blue lines were beneath the bandaging. He thought about the core chamber and the white light and the moment the flame had gone from barely there to deep and steady gold. He thought about 3 days of following a living ship's guidance through her own passages, of listening instead of deciding, of working with instead of working on. He turned and looked at Sarah. "I didn't fix her," he said. His voice was quiet and even and completely certain. "She fixed herself." He looked back at Viratha's blazing scales. "I just made sure she had the chance." Viratha's scales pulsed once beneath his hand. Deep and golden and full and warm. Like a heartbeat. Like a door opening. Like the first day of something that had no end written into it yet. Cole picked up his bags. And he walked inside.